Okay, Clyde, I have 2 awards to give at the top of this episode. The first is for the new era GOAT, because I'll say it, Kyle's the GOAT. He's my favorite tofu boy we've ever had, meat boy of any sort, protein-based meal boy of any sort. He can't be stopped. I think he is destined to hit the legendary 5 individual challenge win club, and I think he'll go for 6. He's clearly the GOAT. That's the first award. Do you have anything to say about that?
I'm pretty low on Kyle's challenge success. I have a whole rant to hit on with Kyle later in the
Okay.
episode, but I think his 4 immunity challenge wins are pretty fraudulent in the grand scheme of the show. Are you saying he's your favorite meat boy that we've covered or favorite new era meat boy?
New era meat boy. I'm not
Okay.
I'm not gonna discount, some classics, right? But I think in the new era of mediocre challenges, he is excelling,
Yeah,
right?
he's the best of the worst in your mind.
Listen, is he dunking on an 8-foot rim? Yes. Is he still dunking a lot? Yes. And so that's my first award. Welcome back to Survivor Analytics, the show where we talk about Survivor and analytics. I'm the voice of the people. My name's Jack. With me, as always, is the Kyle hater himself, the true expert. Say hi, Clyde.
What's up, party people? I am the Kyle hater. I've been predicting him to go home, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks in a row now. And looking ahead to next week's episode, I'm picking Kyle again. I think the second he loses a challenge, he's done. But what's your second
I have
award?
a second award, which is the Thirstiest Fan Reaction Award. Because, god damn, Saul. Saul, the reaction online, and I mean, I don't think I've ever been like, whoa, somebody, maybe Tevin. Tevin had some good looks on the jury, right?
Yeah.
Last year. But Saul walks into this jury in the rain wearing just a vest, and dude looks spectacular. The internet is absolutely thirsty for him. If that doesn't bring him back for Survivor 50, I don't know what will. It's his first week on the jury. We've got a month, right? Yeah, a month, basically, left of the season. I honestly think that Saul could win the people's hearts just with more sleeveless looks like this.
See, I'm a little bit worried about Saul moving forward on the jury. Like, we talk all the time about threat level management in the game. You don't want to peak too early, but I'm worried that Saul is peaking too early with his fits from the jury because he's rolling in with only a vest in the pouring rain. So it's a pretty sexy look, like, let's be honest. But can he really improve upon that every week moving forward? I don't know.
It's a question of environment, I think, because the rain does a lot of the heavy lifting, right? And everybody on the cast, right? Everyone in the tribe, they're soaked, they're miserable, their glasses are wet, right? Genevieve, Rachel, their glasses are covered in rain the whole time. I don't know what they're looking at. Saul's just over there looking great. It's like they strategically walked him in when the rain was at a perfect level.
Well, it's
But
weird too because the Saul fit on the jury does not match the Saul style in game. Where I feel like when he was on the show, he didn't have any crazy outfits.
yes,
But the second he leaves the game, he's walking in on a runway.
and that is quintessential Saul. Listen, he said himself in the game he was trying to play understated, low profile, keep himself in check, right, to maximize chances of success.
Oh, and this is what he meant.
And this is what he meant. This is what he was holding back. Shout out to Saul. He might get my winner pick, honestly, with this look. Time will tell.
He can't get the winner. He can get your honorable mention, but I won't allow that.
That's enough digression. We should jump into episode 10 here.
Can I give a couple opening thoughts on the episode?
I suppose.
I wrote down, just for a holistic look, this is another Andy-centric episode,
Yes.
which means it's one of my favorite episodes of the season. I also thought that this was one that was edited in a very interesting way. I feel like the editors are having a fun time this season. If you remember back in the pre-merge, during the Keyshawn vote, Genevieve has that moment where all of Keyshawn's comments are kind of overlaying her as she's thinking about flipping on him.
Yes.
And this week we get a similar edit with Andy talking about himself as the spider creating these webs of alliances. I'm excited to talk about that later because it's the one time in the history of this podcast that I'm actually excited for an animal shot. But props to the editors for this week. I think they're having a fun time. I also loved the montage of Sue hating on Kyle. I felt like I connected with Sue in that moment.
Can I give you a theory? I think that the editors of Survivor, right? I saw something recently, I think this was a couple weeks ago, that there are cameramen and producers who have been working Survivor since the first seasons. And back then, right, I assume they were filming on some sort of tape or maybe a very, very bulky hard drive that then had to be shipped to an editing bay in LA, somebody who was just piecing together what they had to work with. But now that same editor is learning how to use Final Cut Pro and is learning After Effects or whatever, Adobe Premiere, whatever the, I don't know that much about video editing, but I feel like this season they've unlocked a new level of editing and they're using it constantly. I will say, and we'll come back to it with Andy, I'm pretty sure that Andy can make anything show up on our screens. I think if Andy describes anything, it will show up in Survivor, right? So I do think the edit really loves Andy, and we'll see if that holds any merit. But should we talk about Teenie and Genevieve?
Well, before we talk about Teenie and Genevieve, the first thing that I wanted to hit on was the Teenie Andy dynamic. We got to talk about the Andy perspective,
Oh,
right?
yes, that's a good point.
Because Teenie rolls up to camp after tribal council and they're mad. They immediately call out Genevieve for attempting to leave them out of the plan and embarrass them in front of
Yep.
the entire group. And in my mind, I thought, how does Teenie know that Genevieve led this vote? And the edit quickly answers my question. We
Yes.
get a flashback to tribal council where Andy is the one leaning over to Teenie and telling them that Genevieve already gathered the numbers. This is an expert level move by Andy. It not only breaks up that partnership of Genevieve and Teenie moving forward, but it pushes himself forward as a potential ally for Teenie. Because I feel like Teenie's kind of floundering right now. They're just looking for someone to latch onto. And I think that person could now be Andy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting move from Andy, and I really like it. I hate to agree with you sometimes, but this move, especially of Andy's, I think was really well done because it's not an exchange, right? It's not, I'll tell you something and you work with me. It's an olive branch. It's a establishing a connection that will pay dividends going forward, but does nothing in the moment, right? And it's kind of a level of foresight that I actually really do respect from him.
At the same time, I really respect Teeny's response there and that they were willing to flip their vote onto Saul at tribal council at the very last minute. Like for me, I think if I went on Survivor, one thing that I would have a very difficult time with is flexibility at tribal. I think I'm the type of person that likes to go in with the plan and execute that plan no matter what goes on
Right.
in terms of those conversations. So I think it's difficult to be willing to flip on a dime like that, but Teeny showed some flexibility there.
Yeah. Comes back to camp. I don't think that this conversation needed to happen. And I don't like that Genevieve forces it, but they come back to camp. Teeny's clearly distraught, right? They've just had to vote out one of their closest allies. They feel betrayed by their other ally, although the Teeny Genevieve alliance hasn't really been shown on screen that much, right? And Genevieve kind of smothers them and says, I'm sorry it had to work out this way. We can talk about it. Do you want to talk about it now? Let me know when you want to talk about it, right? Kind of just pushes and pushes until Teeny has nothing, no other recourse than to say, okay, fine, I'll go talk to you because otherwise it'll look like I'm sulking, right? I think if Genevieve and Teeny had kept to themselves, Teeny is just processing the vote. But Genevieve, by pushing this in front of everyone else, is both portraying Teeny as upset and inadvertently portraying herself as the upsetter, right? Hey, I ran this vote and it hurt your feelings. Let's go talk about it. Sorry, everybody else. It's a lose-lose it just didn't need to happen. So
I was also surprised with how upset Teeny felt with the Genevieve betrayal because I didn't get the sense that those were two players who had been in lockstep throughout the season. Like Teeny says in confessional that Genevieve flipped on them earlier in the season by knocking out Keyshawn. So I wouldn't go into the merge expecting Genevieve to work alongside me. Genevieve and Teeny, in my mind, are playing two completely different games. I feel like Teeny is the type of player that forms emotional connections with other people, creates these trusting alliances, and sticks by them. We especially see that, I think, in the first Lavo Tribal Council when Aisha goes home. Teeny knows that Aisha's going out, but they don't have it in them to actually write Aisha's name down. So I feel like Teeny's been leading a bit with their heart, whereas Genevieve is the polar opposite. I don't think there's a single person on this island that Genevieve would not cut
No,
at this stage.
no, and I saw a stat today from somebody on Blue Sky that was Genevieve led the episode in confessionals, and most of those confessionals were about how she doesn't want to have an emotional relationship with anybody, and she basically wants to be unfeeling so that she can cut anyone out, which is a bad vibe in the new era, right? Oh, I don't want to be friends with you because I have to vote you out is so much worse than what she has with Teeny, which is, hey, we're friends, but we have to go up against each other.
Looking forward with Teeny and Genevieve, I think we're in agreement that the relationship is burned. They're not going to be working together as true allies moving forward. Like
No,
circumstances might bring them together for particular votes, but I don't see them really walking arm in arm through the rest of the season. So my question to you is, who will win the battle in the long run? Who goes home first?
Teeny wins the battle. Genevieve goes home first because nobody sees Teeny as a threat. Everybody sees Genevieve as a threat, right? Genevieve was the second option tonight. I will say Teeny phrases their conversations and the ensuing emotional kind of devastation as a breakup, right?
Yeah.
Um, like this friendship is done, unfortunately, and Genevieve's cutting ties basically.
Well, I agree that Teeny's going to last longer. I don't think that's really because Teeny will be the better player. I think it's more so that Genevieve has just mismanaged her threat level. And that's another aspect of Genevieve's game that really surprised me.
Mhm.
When she goes back to camp, she immediately has this target on her back for leading the Saul vote. I don't think Saul was this massive threat in the game to the point where knocking him out warrants getting this giant reputation for Genevieve. I think one thing that Genevieve might have done wrong last week was she was the person walking around and pitching Saul's name. I think sometimes in the new era of Survivor, you want to plant a seed with one player and
Yep.
allow it to disperse from there. You might still get all the credit for the move, but you're not as out in front. But I feel like in the last episode, Genevieve was the one walking around campaigning against Saul. We see her go to the Tuku members. We see her go to Andy. We see her go to Rachel. So I feel like she's pretty responsible for being the face of that operation. I just don't think that the targeting is warranted at the end of the day. Maybe Saul's fits at tribal council are part of the reason why people think Genevieve is such a big threat now. But
There's that balance to be struck, right? Of if you plant an idea with one person and it spreads, will you get enough credit for it in the end? If you bulldoze, like she did, you'll get credit for the move, but you also, I don't think it's necessarily that, oh, Saul was a big threat and she led the move. It was that, oh, Genevieve said a name and kept saying it and we all did it, right?
yeah,
Like, oh, Genevieve was able to convince us all to say that name. How did she do that? Whoa. And so I think it kind of comes down to that. But I mean, we'll talk about Genevieve some more. Uh, can we go to Andy?
yeah, let's go to the animal shot, Jack. I'm ready. My favorite animal shot in the history of this podcast. Can you explain it to me? I don't know if I really fully understand it.
So once again, Andy has grabbed the director's chair from behind the camera, plunked it down in the sand, and said, listen, you camera people, you editors, I'm in charge now. I'm the creative director of Survivor. And he starts talking about how he's a snake and he's in a great position. He's got these relationships with Teeny. Sam is coming to him for essentially guidance because Sam is now lower on the proverbial totem pole than Andy is. He has a cursory relationship with Kyle. He's in a good spot, right? He's got a great relationship with Rachel as well. Basically, first he calls himself a snake, and then he says, but I'm actually like a spider. And then the edit goes crazy. And as Andy describes how a spider catches something in its web and scuttles over and bites the head off, we watch a spider catch something in its web and scuttle over and bite its head off. It's the most literal animal shot of all time. Here's my question for you, Mr. I love Andy so much.
Took him with the first overall pick in the fantasy draft.
You did, and you're winning that fantasy league by hundreds of points. Andy's talking about how he's able to take these people out, right? Bite their heads off, catch them in his web. Has he done that to anybody yet?
Yes.
Who would you argue that Andy's web caught?
Sierra. I think Andy was one of the most prominent players leading the vote against Sierra at, final 11. I don't think it's as big of a staple on his resume when you compare it to Genevieve's move to take out Saul, but I do think that's a tangible thing on his resume that Andy could present at the final tribal council. I think with Andy and looking at this entire edit, it's really impressive how well connected he is on that island. Like you mentioned the names, we see him connect with Kyle. He says he's loyal to the soil, which I feel really hits Kyle's Midwestern vibe.
Yeah.
Rachel straight up calls Andy her number one. We later see Andy connect with Sue, so there's a chance that he could be stepping into the Gabe role for Sue now that he's out of the game. There's an argument for Andy being the most socially insulated player on the entire beach. But with that said, my worry is that other people still don't respect him. I feel like we don't get a lot of confessionals right now of other people saying, oh, we got to keep an eye out for Andy because he could bite us in the butt down the line. And I think you can compare Andy's edit to someone like Rachel or Genevieve, where there are clear examples of contestants perceiving them as threats, which is bad in terms of their short-term trajectory, meaning they could get voted out. But it's better in terms of the end game, where if they sit at the end, they could defeat other people in a jury vote. So I'm feeling much better about Andy's winning chances now than I did in the past. But I think what I'm leaning towards right now is Andy serving as the season's fire-making loser. I think he's going to be the final boss of Survivor 47. And if he ends up losing a jury vote in the end, I will be devastated because I genuinely think he's played a great game. And that's excluding my personal bias.
Oh, yeah. I don't believe that for a second, but okay. I think one thing you hit on there that will be interesting to watch out for is he's loyal to the soil with Kyle. And he's also telling Sue how Kyle calls her and Caroline Tweedledee and Tweedledum, right?
Yeah.
He's running on both sides of the street, and we'll see what happens there because that could bite him in the butt. Should we go to the reward?
Yeah, let's go to the reward challenge. I was not a fan of this one.
Let's get into the details of this, baby. No, I'm just kidding. We'll run through it really fast. 3 teams of 3. They're shackled. Their legs are bound. Their hands are bound to their sides. Snake crawl, pushing a ball with your head to the end. Once everyone on your team has pushed their ball to the end, roll it into a thing, and it's crappy bowling. For reward at Sanctuary, where good things happen. Wraps, salad, fruit, and cake. And I did want to note that Gabe falls to his knees when he finds out it's cookies and cream cake. For my money, not a great cake. But hey, they're on Survivor. Any cake would probably make me fall to my knees. Very, very quickly, the teams don't matter. But the winning team is Rachel, Kyle, and Sam, who Kyle obviously sets a big lead. Rachel does really well, and then Sam closes them out. The only other thing worth noting is Andy bites the ball.
Yeah.
And it's like a 45-second slow-mo of him trying to bite the ball to get it over this hill. Listen, you could draw a graph, and on one axis, on the x-axis, it's time. And then there's 2 y-axes. One of them is the quality of slow motion cameras. The other is the quality of survivor challenges. Over time, slow motion cameras quality has gone up. Over time, survivor challenges quality has gone down. There was a sweet spot there, probably in like 2015, if I had to guess. And now we're way over on the right where the two lines are super far apart. And we're wasting slow motion technology on Andy biting a ball.
I disagree. I thought this was essential for the episode. I appreciated that it gave me more fantasy points because Andy was on screen. I'd say that this challenge was one where it felt like the prop department ran out of items and they had to kind of throw something together at the very last second.
Yep.
I do think it was cool that Sam got his fake bowling segment on one shot. Once I saw the teams for this and you had Sam, Kyle, and Rachel all together, I was pretty confident that
Oh, yeah.
particular group would win. I would say, though, with the Andy slow motion shot, I just thought it was hilarious because it was immediately coming after the spider comparisons. So I felt like we had checked off all of our Andy content for the entire episode, but we were only at the beginning as it pertains to Andy. So
maybe that's the metaphorical head he's biting off this week. Is that what you're saying?
oh, maybe. I didn't even think about that. That's a good
There you
one,
go.
Jack.
So Rachel, Kyle, and Sam win. Should we talk about Sanctuary or
Let's do Sanctuary because big update here. Sam eats his first kiwi, and he is now checking off those food items on his list that he mentioned earlier in the pre-merge. So, me being the super fan I am, I went back and watched that clip to see what foods has Sam still not tried because my
Yep.
theory now is that Sam will stay on Survivor as long as it takes for him to try all of those different items. And there's still a lot left. Here's some foods that we still need to see Sam eat. So, up until this point, we've seen Sam try pineapple as well as kiwi, but he still has not eaten watermelon, eggplant, zucchini, squash, and heirloom tomatoes. I don't know how production will find a way to incorporate those into future sanctuary visits, but we're not really doing exciting rewards anymore. So maybe they'll just make them different by changing up the different meals.
Can I say this? Most of those are egregious. Not having eaten heirloom tomatoes is a little more reasonable because I feel like you have to go out of your way to even know you're eating an heirloom tomato and just not a regular tomato, right? Like they look fancy at the store, but if you're at a restaurant and you get a burger and it has a fancy slice of tomato, you're not going to notice.
My prediction now is that the next food that Sam will check off will be the watermelon. That feels like the easiest bet out of that
And
list.
such a Survivor food, right? Watermelon on
yeah.
Survivor feels like typical. Tactically speaking, basically, Kyle wants to go for Gabe. It's time, right? One of them has to make the move.
Do you like that targeting from Kyle's perspective?
Yes, I think it's great. I think it's exactly right. Because if both of them are still on the island, Kyle's the bigger threat. If somebody says, oh, there's that duo, we've got to break them up, who's got more win equity, Gabe or Kyle? Kyle.
Oh, I disagree. I think Gabe would beat Kyle in a jury vote.
Kyle's got 4 immunity wins.
Yeah, but not everyone cares about that.
Okay, so how do you think Gabe beats Kyle in the end?
I think Gabe just held more agency through the entire season, and Kyle was kind of an outsider of those Tukus. I like this move from Kyle to target Gabe at this point in the episode. I think Kyle was self-aware to realize that we're at Final 9. We have 4 Tukus remaining. One of us is probably going to go home, and it's either going to be me or Gabe. So you got to push the target in that direction. I have no issue with this move at this point in the episode. My real problem with Kyle is that after he wins individual immunity, he continues to target Gabe. I feel like you would want to keep Gabe in the game as a potential shield for you in the event that you lose immunity. Because now, if Kyle loses immunity moving forward, who is he going to push the vote onto? So I feel like once Kyle won immunity, his strategy needed to shift, and instead he piled on the vote for Gabe.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, that's really well said. The only other thing to note from here is the Sam and Rachel conversation where they kind of hash out that Sam immediately flipped on Rachel in the Saul vote and went and told him. And Sam basically says to Rachel, she's the only person he feels he owes loyalty to. Very interesting thing to say considering Andy, right?
Well, Andy flipped against him in the Sierra vote.
Oh, right. That's a great
So
point.
that was
Thank
probably
you.
the moment that broke that bond.
That's a very good point. And so it'll be interesting to see. It really feels like there's this Island of Misfit Toys alliance forming opposite the Tucus, right? The Tucus and Genevieve, and then all of these other disparate people. That's all I've got from Sanctuary.
Other thing I'd note from Sanctuary is that Rachel says in confessional that between the two main targets thrown around camp in Gabe and Genevieve, she would rather Genevieve go home because she simply trusts Genevieve less. And last week, if you were listening to the pod, you know that I locked in Rachel as my official winner pick for the season. And this worries me a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we're going into Final 8 next week, and we just have another example now of Rachel not getting her way. I think the main thing that gives me hope in Rachel moving forward is that idol in her pocket. I think she could pull off some kind of idol play that impresses the jury. Then if she's able to navigate to the end with a couple of these bottom feeders, someone like a Sue, or like Sam describes himself as someone on the bottom, like players like that, she could win just based off of one flashy move. But as it stands right now, I think you can make the argument that out of the 8 remaining players, Rachel has the worst strategic resume. But because of her edit, I'm sticking with her as my unofficial winner pick.
Yeah, I think that's so tricky, right? Because there's some people with a really great resume where all the moves they've made have worked. None of her moves have worked. And then you have Teeny in the middle. Teeny hasn't succeeded, but they haven't really tried, right? They've been caught off guard over and over and over. And so,
well, Teeny's another player that I could see Rachel beating in the end. Like, since Andy seems to be going in this positive trajectory, Teeny's kind of going in the opposite direction. And if you asked me back in like episode 3, I would say Andy is the season's 0 vote finalist. But now, maybe that could be Teeny sitting in that spot.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. I feel like Saul would vote for Teeny.
I don't know. He looks pretty serious on that jury bench.
That's true.
With the vest. I don't know. This might be ice cold Saul. You want to talk about some of the things going around camp during the Survivor Sanctuary?
I mean, basically, there's talk of Kyle and there's talk of Gabe, right? There's a lot of other talk, but Gabe's like, yeah, I think it's time. Sue hates Kyle, right? I think this is when we get the montage. Sue, I felt completely neutral on last week. And with this, I'm like in the anti-Sue camp completely. And I feel like you're the opposite, but talk about it.
Oh, I'm Team Sue for sure. Well, did you like how they edited this where they didn't really show that rivalry until episode 10? Do you think it's better to have that funny montage, or would you have preferred it if they kind of dispersed the Sue-Kyle rivalry at different points in the season?
Oh, I feel like I have just been slapped with whiplash because I had no idea the relationship was this bad, right? That there was all this bad blood. And all of a sudden, I hate him. I hate that he says he's a family man. I hate that he says he's like poor, right? Like, she's so mean about him. It's so much in this moment that I'm like, wow, I don't like Sue anymore. And I like Kyle even more. It feels like they stuck it in here because they hadn't had a chance to put it in sooner or work in the little moments to build the narrative. And it didn't work for me. It didn't,
I think I kind of liked it. It was a fun way of presenting it. My mental image of how this went down is that the editing team kept building up all of these anti-Kyle moments, and they would put them in a folder on their desktop.
Yep.
But they didn't have a spot to really throw it in the episode. So they said, okay, we'll just put it all in at once.
No, exactly. But I don't think it works. I don't think the dump works.
I like a dump every once in a while. I don't want like a dump for everything, but I think it's fun to get caught off guard with some aspects of Survivor.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd say regarding that Sue-Andy conversation, Andy tells Sue that he wants to work with her in the long run. And Sue seems down. And like I mentioned earlier, with Gabe out of the game, I think Andy could be filling in that number one role for Sue.
Mhm.
And I think this is interesting for Andy because earlier in the season, we saw that Andy was hyper aggressive in forming these alliances. He does way too much in trying to align with Rachel in the
Yes.
premiere.
And she has to, like, tell him to cool it, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a major difference between the pre-merge of Survivor and the post-merge, where in the pre-merge, you're kind of getting a feel for everyone. You don't want to jump into any commitments too early. It's a slower game. And I don't think that's where Andy really excels. I think he's someone that's willing to just jump into an alliance with someone. And in the post-merge, especially given the 26-day format, it's so much more fast-paced. So
Yeah.
I feel like this is the environment that's more conducive to an Andy win. But that's just my pro Andy bias shining through.
I don't know. There's a section of this tribe that I feel like strategically I still don't have a grasp on, right? I don't really know what Sue's after. I didn't really know what Gabe was after, right? He and Sue had this dynamic, but like it was always sort of in the background. A lot of the Tuku relationships have really sat. I don't know what's going on with Caroline. I forget she's there, which I feel bad saying, but like,
Yeah. She's probably the most under-edited player on the cast.
yeah. And like Genevieve had a super partial edit, and that's been made up for, right? So I'm sure it'll happen for Caroline, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I guess Teeny's the only other thing I have before the next challenge.
Yeah. Let's hit on that
All right.
now.
So Teeny's still really struggling. They're having like the Survivor sads. There's a term for it that they use. Like like a low point on Survivor for them, losing the relationship with Genevieve, losing Saul, not feeling great. We get a confessional where Teeny talks about, you know, their life as a queer person and coming out of the closet, and then struggling with, the gender binary. So Teeny's sharing all this really heartfelt stuff, right? And especially given that we're in a world where the same day this aired, the first openly trans member of Congress was banned from using the appropriate bathroom in the Capitol.
Oh, that went through? I heard about it getting proposed. I know that was like for sure now.
So, like, the Speaker of the House approved it, right? So that's happening in the world, and on a major network television show, somebody's coming out as non-binary, right? So a time that is really scary for people of that sort, that's so much bravery, for somebody who also on the show has lost all their closest friends, and then their bag catches on fire. And I wanted to give Teeny a massive hug. I feel so bad for them. They're the last standing member of my fantasy team, so there is a little bit of bias, but I've loved Teeny's vibe from the beginning, and I kind of, at this point, unless they're gonna have a massive turnaround, I kinda just wanna say, "Hey, Teeny, can you come back for 48 and, like, start again with a fresh tribe?" Like,
Wait, for 48, not for 50. You want a Bruce-esque
yeah.
return for
Yes.
Teeny?
Yeah, I want them back right away. But, yeah, it was heartbreaking is what it was. I mean,
Yeah, it was definitely a tough moment. I would say that this was a great scene from an editing perspective as well, where one of my constant issues with the new era is that sometimes these players will just launch into backstories that have no real connection to what's going on, like in the game itself. But this felt natural, where like Teeny was experiencing these struggles on top of the game of Survivor.
yes.
So this didn't feel like forced in the episode to me, which is something that I really appreciated, along with like, the power of the story itself. So those are the things that we have pre-challenge. You want to go on to the immunity challenge?
It's similar to one we've seen before, but I don't know if it's exactly like something we've seen before. Basically, it's a double balance challenge. Stand on a little balance beam, hold a plate, balance an increasing number of balls on the plate. Last person standing wins. That's the premise. But it gets interesting because it's rice negotiation, which Jeff is now pronouncing like it's a thing, right? Jeff wants this to be a segment in the show. I think what Jeff is doing, and maybe this is what production is doing, and I'm sort of grappling with this in real time. It's season 47. there's gotta be some serious production boredom. Wow, we've been doing the same thing for 20 plus years? Really? We've gotta spice things up. Let's add the Murgatory. Let's add Sanctuary. Let's add all the twists, the journeys. Let's add Shot in the Dark. Let's add Rice Negotiation, capital R, capital N. And so Jeff's opening offer for a bag of rice is 4 people sitting out. Nobody takes him up on that. Then the tribe members say, hey, how about we give you all of our shots in the dark? And Jeff is appalled. He is so offended that the contestants want to get rid of this gimmick. He says, this is a massive sacrifice from where I stand. And they're all like, nah, we're good.
It's the second time that the cast has turned against Jeff and his BS twist. They did this earlier in the season with that shared amulet that was immediately flushed at the Murgatory because the players knew that it just painted a target on themselves.
Yeah.
So I thought it was hilarious that the cast was just pulling away Jeff's various twists. And I wish they put more things on the table. I wish they said like, hey, Jeff, you know what? We're willing to cut all future journeys from the show in exchange for that rice.
Yeah.
But I'm also a little bit worried for what this means moving forward, where it used to just be that players would sit out the challenge in exchange for rice. But I think Jeff is going to start demanding more and more. Like, I would not be surprised if a couple seasons from now, we see Jeff saying, I want 2 or 3 of you to give up your vote to earn this bag of rice, because it combines Jeff's 2 favorite things, negotiation and removing players' agency. That's like all he wants to do at this show. So
that's a great point.
It's exciting in some ways because we're cutting back to old school Survivor again, but it makes me a little bit worried. I did think it was funny that Jeff said this is a crazy move for the cast, when in reality, like, we're just reverting back to the format of the franchise for the first 20 plus years.
Right. Like, I think in Jeff's mind, this is like basketball players giving up the 3-point line.
Yeah, and it's really not.
It's not. It's not. It's like the basketball players saying, we don't need the t-shirt cannon on timeouts. Basically, they agree. They give up their shots in the dark. They get rice.
Not everyone gives up their shot in the dark, though.
Well, Rachel used hers.
Yeah, Rachel's the only person that doesn't need to give it up. So that's another moment where I think, okay, if Rachel reaches the end and she's facing like pretty mediocre competition, then this could be seen as a valuable strategic move on her resume. That, hey, I'm the only person on this cast that actually got to use my shot in the dark, even though it was unsuccessful. No one else even had the opportunity.
I mean, her shot in the dark was used very strategically. I don't want to take that away from her, but I think hey, everyone else gave them up for rice and I would have, but I didn't have it, or like I'd used it. I don't know if that part really differentiates, but.
Oh, I'm not saying it's a huge move, but I think if it's kind of a lackluster final 3, then any move could be a positive in that stage.
I guess the angle is, hey, no one else got to use this. Look how well I used it. Going into the challenge, it's very windy for this balance-based challenge, which I think is probably why you're going to say that Kyle's win is fraudulent.
Oh, no, it's fraudulent for other reasons.
Okay. They start with 1 ball. A few people, I don't think anyone drops at 1, actually.
Yeah, nobody does. Not even Andy.
Yeah. At 2, Jeff says, quote, it just got a whole lot harder with 2 balls. Thank you, Jeff. Some people drop. And at 3 balls, we're down to 4 people. Kyle, Sue, Teeny, and Sam. Sam looking for his first win. Sue looking to kill Kyle. And Teeny looking to put something on their resume. And Kyle wins out. It comes down to Kyle and Sue. I just want to point this out. Sue's incredibly unsportsmanlike.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Typically, final 2 in a challenge, an endurance challenge especially, you go to each other, you say, good game, that was a good challenge, right? You hug. Sue walks away and sits down and is throughout Kyle's praise, stink eye, going like not having a good time. She's super rude about it. And as a challenge-based viewer, I'm here for the sportsmanship, and there was none there. And I tell you this, if the roles were reversed and Sue had won and Kyle had lost, Kyle's first move would have been to go for a handshake or a hug.
I guess we'll need to wait and see, right?
He's a family man.
Sure. But this is my chance to kind of talk down Kyle.
All right. All right.
Because he has 4 individual immunity wins, and he very well could get 5, and he could join the elite 5-timers club, which Jeff talked about in this episode.
Mhm.
And in case you were curious, there are 6 members of the 5-timers club. We've covered one of them on this podcast. You remember is...
James?
James did not win a single individual immunity on China. What is the season that we just covered before this one?
Cook Islands?
Okay, and who was the challenge beast on that season?
Parvati? Yule! No.
Nope.
Ozzy.
Ozzy, there you go. Ozzy wins 5 out of 6 on Cook Islands.
I had to reload. I had to load the names back into my brain. It took a minute.
But the last time we had a 5 immunity challenge winner happened in season 34, which aired in 2017. So it's been around 7 years since we've seen somebody do this. For that reason, it's a historic moment, right? Because Kyle's right on the verge of making
Greatness.
history.
Yes.
But at the same time, these immunity challenge wins from Kyle's perspective are very fluky in my mind. Like, this week's challenge win is the only time this season where Kyle defeated the entire cast to earn individual immunity. So let's look back at his track record. So earlier in the season, he wins the Mergatory immunity necklace. But that is not one where he defeats the entire cast. They start off with an obstacle course, and then the group that wins, they compete in an individual challenge. So Kyle only beats half the players there.
Okay.
Later on the split tribal, where Tiana goes out, Kyle doesn't even get first place. He gets third. But because his group was the losing group, he earns the immunity necklace. So that's his second win.
Oh, okay.
His third win came at the final 11 where Sierra goes home, and that was a challenge where one man and one woman would win individual immunity. So in that case, he's not competing against the entire cast. I think he's up against 4 other players there. So, yes, he has the distinction of 4 individual wins on his resume, but if you're competing against a smaller collection, I don't really think it's as impressive. So even if Kyle hits 5, I won't put him in that elite challenge tier. He'll still be a great challenge competitor, but I'm not going to look at this as like a top 5 challenge run in Survivor history.
I hate it when you make a good point, man. Like, I want to hype him up. I love Kyle. I do think when he wins these challenges, he does so handily. But I mean, those are fair points, right? When you split it up by gender, when you do the team thing, like, yeah, it's fair. It's fair.
Yeah. It doesn't really hit the same in my mind. Like, you can compare him to someone like Ozzy, where Ozzy competes in 6 challenges, he wins 5 of them, and he's beating the entire cast, and he's beating, like, great challenge competitors. He's beating people like Yule, who is shredded. He's beating people like Parvati, who's in incredible shape.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe if Kyle hits 7 challenge wins, then I'll be impressed, but as it stands right now, he's just another tofu boy in my mind.
Okay.
You want to go to post-challenge pre-tribal council discussions?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the question, and I want to ask you the question of Gabe or Genevieve.
So those are the 2 big names around camp. You knew the editors were excited yet again because that meant that they could do that shot at tribal council with just the G. I think out of the remaining 8 players, the only way they can do that again is if Sam and Sue are the 2 targets, but I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Maybe they could do it if it's like Genevieve and Caroline. So you start off with the C motion, but you don't know if you're getting that little ending to it. So with all that said, Genevieve and Gabe are the 2 targets. I think the clear decision here is that you got to take out Gabe because you just don't want the Tukus to go into the final 8 with 4 people. So one of those members needs to go. But for this vote, I think one player whose perspective is really interesting is Caroline, because she's the one this week that says, I can't beat Gabe in a jury vote, so now is my chance to take him out. And I think this is a really smart move for her. She correctly identifies that the numbers are going in the Tuku direction, and by cutting Gabe, I think as it stands, she's Sue's next closest ally. So one question that I'll be excited to see for next week is, who will Sue fall back on? Will she go to Andy because Andy trash talked Kyle with her? Or will she go to Caroline, who she's just known for more of the season? So I think this was good for Caroline, and it's still to be determined what it means moving forward. But
It's kind of another moment where Caroline wants to make a move and the move is already happening. I feel like we've had a few of these where she knows which way the wind is blowing and wants to continue, like, wants to be in that direction, but someone started it, right? And so she's not going to see credit for these things. And it feels like a moment where she's going to look back on her time on the show. And unless things change dramatically, right, I don't see a win in her future. She's going to look back and go, wow, I was constantly right. And I was just a step behind. Like, if I had been in the right conversations first, I was in the right really frequently, which is, I'm sure, very frustrating.
But at the same time, I don't think you need to do something crazy and flashy on Survivor to win the season. Like, Caroline is one of the few contestants on this cast that has been a part of the consensus plan at every tribal council. The players who had that distinction are Caroline, Andy, and Genevieve. They're the only ones that have not been blindsided yet. So I think if Caroline sits in the end against the right people, she could say, yes, I didn't do this crazy flashy thing in front of the jury, but the people who made those moves, like Gabe, like a Genevieve, became targets and they were voted out. I was operating more so as the ocean. I forget who says that this week. Someone,
Oh,
I think
this
it's
is a
Teeny.
great quote. No, it's Rachel. Rachel says, quote, I don't want to be the captain. I want to be the ocean guiding the ship, like moving the water itself.
I don't think that really applies to Rachel right now. I think
No,
right now she's more like the starfish on the bottom of the ocean that's just kind of hanging out.
she's a barnacle on the ship along for the ride.
Probably, but I think Caroline is more of the ocean where she's working with the majority. She's always a part of the plan, but she's not the head person directing it. So I could see a win for her. The edit definitely goes against that since she's so invisible, but I think she's playing a good kind of under the radar game. Anything else that you want to talk about with this decision between Gabe and Genevieve?
Um, I don't think so. I think it's a fairly straightforward decision that the edit, we talked a lot about, oh, we haven't seen anything from Genevieve for ages, right? And the edit was like, oh, this is perfect. We can play up the ambiguity by putting in a ton of Genevieve confessionals, right? I mean, we're constantly hearing from Genevieve and we don't really need to. Like, I don't know if it adds all that much, but whatever.
Only other thing I'd throw out is a move from Kyle, where earlier in the episode, he was the one throwing out Gabe's name. But right before Tribal Council, he's the one that goes to Gabe and tells him that he's a serious target.
Yeah.
So I feel like I can't get a full read on Kyle. Like, what does he want to go on here? Is he telling Gabe because he wants Gabe to like him for when he goes to the jury, or is he legitimately trying to save Gabe at this point? I don't know. I also thought there was a chance that maybe Sue would play her idol on Gabe, but Sue's idol has completely fallen into the background. They have not shown that thing since the pre-merge, so
I
we'll need
forgot
to wait
about
and
it.
see. Tribal Council. We already talked about Saul walking
I mean,
in.
we could talk about Saul for another 45 minutes, but, I don't know if just go watch it over and over again, people. Like, oh my God. Oh, I wrote down in the tribal, I I have 3 things written down for tribal. Pouring rain, Saul, are you kidding me? And Caroline has no vote finalist energy.
Really? I don't get that vibe from Caroline.
I think if Caroline sits next to the wrong people at the end, she doesn't have a resume. Being on the right side of the vote is not enough for me to, like, it's good, right? But I feel like it's a baseline, right? You either need to have a pretty good move and be right all the time, or like a couple of really big moves and you can make some mistakes. I don't think her survivor GPA is high enough to be a winner right now, unless she's next to like Sue and Sam.
See, I think people like Sue and Teeny give off way bigger zero vote finalist energy than someone like Caroline, just because they're making so many more mistakes. But I will say, I think we've covered some winners who held substantial agency and won the season without a big move. The first one that comes to mind for me is Jam Jam, where I think Jam Jam was always a part of the consensus plan in 44. He's rarely left out of the vote, but there isn't a staple move on his resume that you can really point to. And he just kind of lucked out in that he was sitting against two inferior players in Heidi and Carolyn in the end. Only other note that I have from Tribal is that Rachel does a great job at managing the jury. She says, quote, "I don't think that Sierra and Saul would be sitting over there if we were taking out the weakest players." So I think that's a great way for Rachel to hype up those people that were voted out of the game and potentially earn some favor with them should she sit at the end. So I got the vote here if you want to hear it.
Let's hear it.
It's a 7-2, 7 on Gabe, 2 on Genevieve. The only people that vote against Genevieve are Gabe himself and Sue. So I'll be excited to see Sue's reaction going back to camp next week. And with that, I have an epitaph for Gabe, which is R.I.P. Gabe. The wounded birds have overtaken the nest. If you remember earlier in the season, Gabe calls Caroline and Sue his wounded birds, and Caroline casts a vote against him here.
Very nice. Very nice.
As Gabe walks out the door, he tells Jeff, "I'll be back."
I was going to ask you about this. Do you think he'll be back?
No. Maybe, okay, I don't want to say no forever, but no for Survivor 50 is what I'm saying. Like, if they do Survivor 50 and then they follow that up with, like, Survivor New Era All-Stars at 52, then Gabe could be on that list. But it's really difficult to make the argument that Gabe is one of the 18 players that need to come back for that iconic season. So,
Oh, definitely not. Definitely not.
and if Gabe were to come back, would you have a lot of faith in him as a player? Like, would you take him in a draft or would you kind of stay clear? Because he was on your team this year.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, he was. He was
Was
the
he?
last pick of the draft. You don't even know. You had John,
And
Sue-
Teeny. No, I
No,
took
John,
and
yeah, Teeny, and Gabe was your
I
third
took
round
John
pick.
and Teeny because I loved them to death, and then I was like, fine, I'll take Gabe, and I totally forgot. I think having seen him, I would take him again. Knowing a little bit of his style, right? I liked his play. I do feel like he was under-edited, especially after the merge. Pre-merge, we got an okay look at him, but I feel like he had a good run and good connections that weren't fleshed out enough because we spent so much time with Gata, and that's just sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. So
See, I feel like Gabe was pretty unlucky in terms of the outcome of the challenge this week, where if Kyle loses individual immunity, I'm pretty confident that the vote falls on Kyle over Gabe. This was just a spot in the season where a Tuku player needed to go home, and Gabe was either the first or the second biggest threat on the board within that group. So if he were to come back in the future, I think I would have a decent amount of faith in Gabe, just because he's not going to walk into his next season as one of the biggest names on the board, but he's shown some strategic acumen. He found an idol this season. He locked down a number one ally in Sue. He voted in the majority at every tribal council except this week. So there's some good qualities there. I would say out of the players voted out so far this season, I think Gabe was the best. Not in terms of entertainment, but more so in terms of player quality.
interesting. Okay, fair enough.
You ready for winners and losers?
Let's do it. Who is your loser? I feel like we did winners last week.
Loser is Kyle. I don't buy into these 4 individual immunity challenge wins. They're fraudulent in my book. And like I said earlier, when he won immunity, that was his chance to keep the other threats in the game. And instead, he followed the group in knocking out the only player that could be a bigger shield for him. So now I'm more confident than ever that the second Kyle loses immunity, he's going right out the door.
I love Kyle. I think that's valid. I had not considered the shifting of focus to keep Gabe around. That would have been a really great move. He's not my loser because he's going to win another challenge. No doubt about that. My loser is Genevieve. I feel like there's too much bad blood against her in the air. Sue's in trouble. Kyle's in trouble. But I feel like Genevieve's an easy consensus threat in quotes, perceived threat, that there's a lot of people that don't really want to work with her, right? Or she's not at the top of a lot of people's lists, right?
Yeah.
I don't know who. Maybe Caroline is the top of her list, right? Um, and so maybe. So Genevieve for that reason.
No, that's fair. I think there's definitely reason to be concerned with her long-term outlook. With that said, I feel like if Genevieve sits at the end, she beats anybody in a jury vote. But the route to that point will be pretty difficult. Like my prediction now is that, and I think I said this last week, that Genevieve is your fifth place finisher. She's the one that reaches the merge. She loses that immunity challenge, and it's a unanimous vote against her, just like Maria in 46.
Mhm.
On to winners. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. You probably knew this before you turned on the podcast. My winner is Andy.
Yep.
He knocks out Gabe. He potentially sets himself up as Sue's number one ally. The edit is doing him major favors, and he's getting me a ton of fantasy points every week. I think he's either number one or number two in the league in terms
Yep.
of fantasy points.
Yep.
So I'm hoping Andy wins the season just so I can go back and screenshot all of the comments that people left on my preseason winner pick. Because when I posted that video, people went on after the premiere and were just dragging me through the mud.
I mean, if you get it, you deserve it.
Well, the same goes to you with Teeny.
My winner's Rachel. I like where Rachel's at. While I like where Andy is at, I feel like one slip of the tongue from Andy, and everyone goes, "Wait a minute, Andy's playing us all," right? Where Rachel has these connections that are fewer than Andy's, but stronger, I think, or less, at least less overt, right? She's connected to Andy. She's connected to Sam. She's a little connected to Kyle now, right? And she's got an idol. So I like Rachel's positioning. I don't see her being a target anytime soon.
I agree. I also think like the idol and her social insulation are the two biggest positives for Rachel.
Social insulation. What a good term. I like that.
Oh yeah. I throw around that term a lot. In my top 50 ranking, which you can also check out, premiering every Monday on this page.
Hey, how do you want to start your Monday, folks? On your drive to work, depressed after a weekend that was all too short? Listen to an hour of Clyde monologuing about Survivor.
Hear me yap about 10 contestants for an hour every Monday, from now through mid-December, I want to say.
Merry Christmas.
I just exported the final video because once I release all the snippets, I want to do a full video. That's the whole 4 hours of every
Dude,
ranking in the top
it's
50.
your magnum opus. It's incredible.
My laptop was cooking during that export.
Honestly, I almost feel like after that we have to shut down until Survivor 60 just so that you have more people to rank. Because like I feel like keeping up with it, you need to just have an interval.
Well, it's like anything else. Like I'm indecisive. So I feel like I finished the ranking and I pressed export. And immediately when I did that, I thought, oh, I should move this player up or down a couple spots. Like my
Yeah.
top 20 is locked, but outside that's a little bit fuzzy. But enough about that. Dishonorable mention to eggplant. Sam listed a bunch of foods that he's never tried in the pre-merge, and I think that eggplant is the least likely option to appear on a Survivor reward. It was either that or zucchini.
I think zucchini is more likely.
Yeah, I think zucchini's more likely. I can't even name a dish that would incorporate eggplant that they would give on reward.
Baba ganoush if they did like some dips, some Mediterranean dips, hummus
Ooh,
and baba
maybe.
ganoush. Zucchini I feel like could show up in like a salad pretty easily. But eggplant, you gotta cook, right? Or it's toxic.
I've had eggplant only a couple times in my life. Not
It's
zero like
good.
Sam.
It's good, but it's not like great. Shout out to eggplant, I guess. Anyway, my honorable mention goes to the yellow-lipped sea crate.
Is that the spider?
No,
Are you kidding me? Come on, give the honorable mention to the spider. I want to know every piece of history with that one spider and then how it relates to Andy.
it's hard to identify spiders, and it's much easier to Google snakes that live in Fiji. Because Andy first called himself a snake, right? And then at the end of the episode, Gabe calls somebody, I think Teeny, a snake.
Yeah,
or
it's teeny.
and then Andy's like, nice. So the yellow-lipped sea crate. Crate is spelled Krait. Highly venomous snake, right? So I think Andy would be proud. Black and blue snake with a yellow snout, and it's a semi-aquatic snake, actually. So it is not a sea snake, right? It is a different type of snake than a sea snake that spends all their time in the water. but they eat eels. There's a video on Wikipedia if you wanna watch this snake eat an eel, it's disgusting. They are so slow on land, they're like 5 times faster in the water, which kinda makes sense. But basically, they've evolved so far into the water that they can't actually do that well on land. And, they're super venomous, but they are also eaten. Their meat is exported to Japan from the Philippines for consumption. So,
That's not something that we need to worry about with Andy. He will not be the snake that gets eaten this season. I do
yeah.
appreciate the parallels in the snake evolving and Andy evolving
Yeah.
from his breakdown in the pre-merge till now.
That's all I've got.
That's all I've got as well. Thank you again for listening this week.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Jack will not be on the pod next week, so we're in the works of finding a substitute co-host to work with me.
And it'll be up after Thanksgiving regardless, so happy Thanksgiving. Thankful for all of you.
We're making our way through the season. I think I texted you about this, but the finale this season is a two-parter that spans 2 weeks. I don't know how they're going to release it, if they're going to do like the final 6 and final 5 one week and then final 4 and final tribal in the other. So we'll kind of figure it out as we go, but we'll be covering the whole thing along the way.